It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to the third annual Global Human Rights Symposium.
The Human Rights Fellowship emerges from a broader human rights initiative at Gallatin, attempting to link human rights practice with academic work in human rights.
Hello, my name is Declan Galvin, and I am a master's candidate at Gallatin School, focusing and concentrating on African politics. This past summer, I was carrying out research in Kenya, and I was doing ethnography with a youth movement called Mungiki, and affiliated with the United States International University, which is a university there that provided research support and then also had me teaching classes. My research project is centered on understanding how a militant movement like Mungiki, which has been responsible for numerous human rights violations, is also responsible for empowering the same kind of different disenfranchised communities that they harmed, and how we can then position Mungiki within existing human rights discourses. So the project is quite large, but I wanted to focus on something that I hope is interesting, though it's academic, so try not to fall asleep. Is the challenges that I think of witness protection with regard to the ICC's case in Kenya, which I'll explain more details about. But before I kind of dive in, I wanted to thank the Global Human Rights Fellowship for sponsoring this research. It's a really big deal to be able to do field work as you begin to apply for PhD applications, and so it's something that's really going to be helpful. I'd like to thank Vasuki and Patrick for providing lots of support, Sally Mary for the independent study, and USIU for giving me sponsorship. Background and context that I want to provide is with regard to the post-election violence, which happened in 2007 and 2008, and it's the most recent and worst wave of violence in Kenya related to elections, and it was with the parliamentary and the presidential elections in 2007. That violence was coordinated and sponsored by elite politicians and business leaders, and it was targeted against regular civilians and Kenyans who were in opposition to that politician's particular party. And so politicians on both sides were involved, and it resulted in a Waki commission, which Waki headed up this fact-finding inquiry and tried to find out what the causes of this violence was. And they came up with 23 different perpetrators, two of which just now happen to be the vice president and the president of the country. At the time, they were just members of parliament, and since that information came out, they ended up getting elected democratically. So that's one piece that I want to throw out there. A second one is the Mungiki movement, which is what I really conducted research with. And it's a criminal network and political organization. It's more than that, but shorthand, that's kind of what it is. And they started in 1987. They've performed kind of numerous roles within society, including community empowerment, but then they've also contracted their services for politicians and have committed violence. And they were sponsored most certainly by the current president, Uhuru Kenyatta, to kill his opponents during the post-election violence. And so those are two kind of important things to mention before discussing the International Criminal Court, which was established in 2002 to try and lay important legal precedents in places that have experienced crimes against humanity or crimes of aggression. And so it's made in places where usually the court system wouldn't be able to arrest and prosecute those people with any kind of due process. And so the ICC, aspires to provide that kind of support. They've been investigating Kenya and involved in Kenya since about 2009 with regard to that violence. And the president and vice president present an interesting challenge to the ICC, because the ICC's prosecuted people, they're continuing to prosecute people, but they haven't prosecuted sitting heads of state with the exception of Omar Bashir of Sudan. But he wasn't elected after the charges were filed. And so Kenya's really an interesting case in that sense. And again, focusing on witness protection, the ICC says that if regular criminal procedures and protecting of identity is not good enough, then they will step in and protect victims and witnesses. And as I'll begin to show, they're not, that isn't really happening. There's been significant witness tampering. This is going to be some context of research that I haven't specifically carried out, and then I'm going to talk about witness harassing and tampering with Mungiki, which is what I was carrying out work with. And the American Embassy sent a confidential cable in 2010, early on in the process with the ICC, basically articulating their concerns that not enough is being done with protecting witnesses and protecting those people who are going to be giving testimony for against the president and the vice president. The current prosecutor, the chief prosecutor of the ICC, Bensouda, she claims that Mungiki have actually been going missing as early as February. So before the election was in March, and so before that election of the current president, Mungiki people were already disappearing, and the families didn't know where they were, and the families were open about the likelihood that their husbands or sons were implicated in that violence in 2007. And the BBC reported that. There have also been reports saying that there's a group of elite business leaders and lawyers who are going around bribing and intimidating witnesses and trying to force them to recant their statements against the president and vice president. And as I say yesterday, but I wrote this yesterday, so Tuesday, the ICC issued their first arrest warrant ever for the purposes of witness tampering, and that was in Kenya. I'm going to move just briefly to the research that I conducted with Mungiki and then the violations and witness tampering that I witnessed there or interviewed people about. Maina Njenga, who's the leader of this group, Mungiki, was officially listed as a witness on May 8th, but that event didn't really surprise anybody. Everybody knew at some point it was going to come out that the ICC is officially making him a witness. And during my summer carrying out ethnographic work with them, I saw or interviewed people about a series of events, one of which is that the police are actually forming splinter groups within the group of Mungiki, and that's centered on a lot of property and a lot of power struggles that they're trying to exacerbate. And myself and other scholars who've been focusing on Mungiki believe that this is the intent to kind of bring about Maina Njenga's kind of removal, death, or put into irrelevance, something along those lines. Within that context, there have been false media reports in the Nairobi Star saying that he was killed, and that was a front page news article that I was surprised to know about because they said that he was killed on a Sunday, and I had seen him that Sunday, so I was spending time with him the day that he was supposedly killed, so I knew that that report was actually false. They had also, and when I followed up on the story and began interviewing people maybe about how this story began, it had come out that the police had leaked false documents saying that he had been killed and that there was this incident, and that incident actually never took place. And the same goes for he was supposedly killed by gunshot, and this was announced on a Kikuyu radio station, and that event never actually took place. The police were flying helicopters over the church to scare and intimidate people, and even representatives of the government would come to the church, and I'll explain during Q&A maybe why this was all taking place at church, but there was several thousand people there. And the government would have officials come, and then they deliberately exposed themselves as government officials when they were pretending to be reporters to kind of create panic and lots of confusion. And so this is kind of other ways of kind of harassment and intimidating and letting people recognize that they're kind of being watched through this process. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to mention two kind of conclusions or findings that I think are worth mentioning with regard to kind of witness protection. And I think that the first is that the International Criminal Court's Witness and Victims Unit is very unprepared for the task in Kenya. When they began setting events in motion, the Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto were not the heads of state, and events changed. And I think that there needs to be more robust measures to protect witnesses. And that needs to include relocation programs. Many people have been killed or gone disappearing or got disappeared, not just Mungikis. And so that needs to be looked at. And I think that the Kenya case may counter the ICC's mission. And so if the ICC's mission is to eliminate establish precedents and legal precedents to stop crimes against humanity, I think that what's happening in Kenya's case is they're actually entrenching impunity because now the heads of state are actually able to use violence and intimidation against people who are victims or who are trying to assist with bringing about some sort of justice. I'd like to thank you all. That will be it.